Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakaha Kodash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, the great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'll be profiling an article from antiwar.com titled, Iraqi PM wants support from the U.S. but wants combat troops to leave. Mustafa al-Kadhimi will meet with President Biden on July 26th. Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi said Sunday that while he wants continued support from the U.S. to fight ISIS, which you should know by now is nothing more than a proxy army used by the United States government and the State of Israel to destabilize the Middle East, he will push President Biden to withdraw combat troops from the country in an upcoming meeting. And while you may see shifts of troops here or there, or slight reductions in numbers, overall, the United States military will not leave that Middle Eastern region. It's prophesied for the U.S. military, along with these other heathen militaries, to be gathered down into that Middle Eastern region for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. This is Joel chapter 2, verse 20. But I will remove far off from you the Northern Army, the North American Army, the United States military, all branches, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Army, etc., and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, that Middle Eastern region. In this verse, specifically Saudi Arabia, because that's going to be the main staging ground for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, with his face toward the East Sea. And when we look at a map of the Middle East, we have Saudi Arabia right here, and what's to the east? You've got the Tigris and Euphrates River, as well as Iraq to the northeast, which currently has U.S. troops there. Then to the immediate east, you've got the Persian Gulf, and then Iran, the U.S. and the State of Israel's main target in the Middle East. And his hinder part, or behind him, toward the utmost sea, the Red Sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he hath done great things. And for you heathen nations' militaries, especially the United States' military personnel in the Middle East during this battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, you better come to terms with that being your final resting place, because there's going to be a great slaughter in the Valley of Jehoshaphat of you heathen nations' militaries, because it's all the judgment of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai on you heathen nations for touching the apple of his eye, the children of Israel, who are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. So again, no matter what you hear about troops getting shifted around here or there, or possible reductions in troop numbers, ultimately the United States military is there to stay in that Middle Eastern region, and other heathen nations' militaries will be gathered down to there for that battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. We are visiting Washington to set out our relationship with America. The Iraqi army still needs their forces for training. We need their support to our Air Force, and we need their intelligence support in the fight against ISIS, Kadhimi told Saudi Arabia's Al-Hadath TV. Kadhimi is set to meet with Biden in Washington on July 26th. The visit will be to set out this relationship and to put an end to the presence of combat forces, because the Iraqi army can now fight for itself on behalf of Iraqis and the world against these terrorist groups in Iraq. There is no need for combat troops, the Iraqi Prime Minister said. There are currently about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq under the umbrella of the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition. What a joke. Since coming into office in May 2020, Kadhimi has been under intense domestic pressure to get U.S. troops to leave. In January 2020, Iraq's parliament voted unanimously to expel U.S. forces after Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis were killed in Baghdad by a U.S. drone strike. In April, the State Department released a statement that said the U.S. role in Iraq had transitioned to an advisory one and that combat troops could be redeployed, in quotes. But so far, the U.S. has not agreed to a timeline on the withdrawal of troops. Narrowing the withdrawal focus to only combat troops leaves the U.S. a lot of wiggle room to keep a sizable presence in Iraq if it can be framed as an advisory and training mission. And the U.S. doesn't have to worry about its troops leaving because, again, the U.S. military, along with these other heathen militaries, will be gathered down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. I will remove far off from you the northern army to a land barren and desolate. This is Joel chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, the heathen Gentiles, the Edomites, or the so-called white people, the Moabites, or the so-called Chinese, the Ishmaelites, or the so-called Arabs, the Elamites, or the so-called East Indians, the Hamites, or the so-called Africans, the Ammonites, or the so-called Japanese, etc., etc. Prepare war, World War III, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, nuclear war, and that it's exactly what the true men of the Lord, the prophets of the Most High, chiefly through GMS or Great Millstone, are doing, going out onto the highways and byways, as well as putting up video epistles like this, proclaiming among you heathen Gentiles to prepare for war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. You've already got U.S. military personnel in the Middle East, in countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. And then you've also got Russian military personnel in Syria, helping to back them up against the mess that the U.S. tried to make in their country during that Syrian civil war. And more heathen nations as militaries will be gathered down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for this battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. And we're definitely seeing the weak saying they're strong. Just recently, you had the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini, call for other Muslim nations to resist Western interference in their countries, and they specifically named the United States of America. And then you've got other smaller nations like North Korea bucking up to the United States of America as well, saying that they've got nuclear-capable weapons that can reach the homeland if necessary. And also, we're seeing these heathen nations beat their plowshares into swords and their pruning hooks into spears, getting onto that war footing. Over these past couple of years, you've seen these major nations up their military budgets and build up their military arsenals with those hypersonic nuclear-capable weapons that Russia has, China building 100 new nuclear missile silos, etc., etc. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen. These heathen nations, the United States of America, Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the state of Israel, these European nations and NATO, these other NATO nations, you name it, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh, and those mighty ones are the death angels of the Most High, holding back this destruction, waiting to get the go-ahead from the Most High to release it, which is mainly going to happen after the MOB, or the RFID/NFC, MICROCHIPIMPLANT is mandatorily implemented. And with each passing day, we're getting closer and closer to that mandatory implementation. This battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, is closer than we think. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew is Yahweh Shaphat, or Yahweh's judgment, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. And when you go up to the first couple of verses in the chapter, you'll see why the Most High punishing you heathen nations, chiefly you Edomites, for afflicting the apple of his eye, the children of Israel, who are again the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Verse 13, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision, and it's much closer than we think. And in the midst of the battle in the valley of Jehoshaphat with these heathen nations fighting each other, Yahushai Hamashiach, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, who doesn't look like a so-called white man or Edomite with stringy brown hair, but actually has the appearance of a dark-skinned Negro with a white woolly beard and afro, as pursuant to Revelation chapter 1, is going to make his second coming and fight these heathen nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is 2 Esdras chapter 13 in the Apocrypha. I'm going to start at verse 5. After this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men out of number from the four winds of heaven, from the four corners of the earth. Multitudes gathered down into the valley of decision to subdue the man that came out of the sea, Yahushai Hamashiach. But I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain and flew up upon it. The chariot, or so-called UFO, that Yahushua is returning in, and it was so massive that, as it says in 2 Esdras chapter 13 verse 7, but I would have seen the region or place whereout the hill was graven, and I could not. This massive fathership chariot that Yahushua returned in was so massive that the prophet Esdras couldn't see the end of it. Think about those so-called UFOs in those Independence Day movies. They were miles long. And after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet durst fight. While these heathen nations are going to be fighting each other in the valley of Jehoshaphat, when Yahushua cracks those clouds and returns in that massive fathership chariot, they're going to stop fighting each other and band together to try to fight against Yahushua. And lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war, but only I saw that he sent out of his mouth, as it hath been, a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests, that chariot shooting concentrated heat, or so-called laser beams from it. And also, when you saw those UFOs in Independence Day, where did that beam come out from? The bottom, and it looked like a mouth was opening up before it shot that green beam out. And they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude nothing was to be perceived but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. When Yahushua's chariot starts shooting those so-called laser beams onto these heathen nations' militaries, it's going to be like shooting crabs in a barrel, a first-round knockout, no contest. These heathen nations' militaries won't stand even the slightest chance against Yahushua in the heavenly host. And as it says, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude, nothing was to be perceived but only dust and smell of smoke. Hey, these soldiers and their military hardware getting burnt to a crisp. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim were edified. Just keep strong and keep pushing this word. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.